Welcome all to today's webinar. We have a very interesting subject and a very interesting person in the room. Dare to Lead Like a Girl author, Dalia Feldheim. Welcome to the show. Happy to have you here.
Thank you. Great to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it's a pleasure. It's an honor, in fact. And if I may just introduce myself to the audience who is coming in for the first time to attend this webinar. My name is Sharad Agarwal. I'm the founder of onlywebinars.com. I'm based in Dubai, and I've been running this platform for slightly over 2 years. We've done 60 plus webinars, and we do leadership, we do metaverse, NFT, Web3. So this is a leadership series webinar, and I'm very happy to introduce to you Dalia, who actually I got to know about through a common friend. His name is James Michael Lafferty, who's also based in Dubai. He was one of the speakers on our earlier webinar last year. He's an Olympic coach, a great guy, a great team leader. And he talked about championship, how you can be a champion in life, in any field, really. So thanks to James, I connected to Dalia, and here we are, Dalia. So welcome once again. And I'm going to hand it over to you. Who is the real Dalia Feldheim? Please introduce yourself to our audience.
Thank you. Well, I will say that Jim was my first boss. They say your career is determined by your first boss. So you call him James. For me, he's Jim. I'll talk about him a little bit later because he's part of the story that led me to write the book. So who is the real Dalia is a question I'm still asking myself, I guess. But I'm a mom of 3. I have a 20-year-old, 19-year-old, and 14-year-old. I have a crazy startup entrepreneur. I've been in the world of marketing, most recently as a CMO. I worked for Procter & Gamble, and then another company that I'll talk about later. Great career. I call it my 17 years of flow with P&G, and then I had 3 years of challenge that a little bit kind of propelled me into my second career. So in my second career, I decided to pivot my career and actually go back to psychology, which is where I started. I did my organizational psychology master's in INSEAD and basically positive psychology with Professor Tal Ben-Shahar. I met him kind of in a conference. We became friends. He listened to me talk. And he's like, Dalia, you need to speak on TED and write a book. And I remember I was like, me, any girl next door. And he said, well, that's why it's so relevant. So you see here, whoops, on the other side, here, my TED talk that went live in 2019 and my book that went live in June of this year. So today I'm an organizational psychologist working with the likes of the Googles, the Microsoft, and leadership development. Positive psychology. I'm also a founder of EduTech called Happiness, which is about bringing, the principles of positive psychology or solving our daily challenges using tools from positive psychology. And all in all, I'm on a mission to bring back purpose and joy to the workplace. So that's me.
Amazing, amazing. So, the title of your book, Dare to Lead Like a Girl, it got me thinking, right? Because you're talking about surviving and thriving in the corporate jungle. So can you please put some context on why this topic first and why it's a book on leadership?
Well, first of all, the name. I remember when I first decided on the name, everyone was like, oh, men won't read it. And it's a book for both women and men. And I actually put an article by that name on LinkedIn, and 70% of the readers were men. So just like you, it got them thinking. But the name, where does it come from? In 2014, I was one of the marketing directors responsible for the Always Run Like a Girl campaign. I don't know if anyone remembers that, but it became, iconic campaign, recently chosen as the 10 most influential campaigns of the decade. And, as a marketing director, I'm very proud of the business results, but as a mom, I'm even more proud that, my youngest daughter called me from school all excited, Mom, they're showing your ad in social studies. More than a commercial, it became an icon for women empowerment. And in that commercial, we ask a young girl what it means to lead like a girl. And she says, well, it means run as fast as you can. And then we ask kind of a teenager, And she kind of, somehow during puberty, it becomes an insult. So our goal with that commercial was to change the meaning of words and reclaim the phrase like a girl to mean be proud to be who you are. And so now I believe it's time to reclaim that phrase again, and this time in the world of leadership. And what does it mean to lead like a girl? And I'll talk a little bit more about that. But basically, it's a homage to that Always campaign, but also a provocation for both women and men to realize that our old archaic ways of leadership are not relevant for the future of work. Not even talking Web3 or the metaverse, just, the principles of, the warrior, industrial kind of efficiencies, they just don't work. And we see it, employees are suffering. So you asked why now? I'll tell you my personal story, but in principle, right? I realized that kind of my hardship was common. In fact, too many employees today suffer from, challenging workplace. 85% of employees are unengaged in the workplace. So we only have 15% engaged employee. That's a crazy number when you think about it, right? Even crazy at 20% hate their work so much that they want everyone around them to hate it. Those are the toxic employees. And that's costing us. Research estimates it at about $7 trillion a year in stress-related disease, absenteeism, etc. So the good news and what I've studied is that we can turn it around and we can teach ourselves to, be happier and more resilient in the workplace. And that's kind of what my book is all about. How, I share my own story of how I survived and thrived in a toxic environment and my learning from, the tale of two cities, 17 years in a great company, right? That really believes in people first, that was P&G, and 3 years in a challenging environment. And I saw on myself, how I delivered 200% in one company, and in the second one, maybe 10%, because I was so busy defending myself. And I said to myself, that's a huge waste of human potential. And that became my mission, to kind of help more leaders understand what's the secrets to creating that kind of thriving environment, more employees to take, the destiny in their own hands. And yes, you can't coach yourself out of a toxic environment, but you can build your own resilience. So that kind of became my driving force to why now? Because too many employees are suffering, and we know from research what's working to kind of prevent that. So that's my mission.
Great. So I was listening to your TED talk earlier this morning, and you have some 178,000 views. Seriously, that's a lot. I get 100 views when I host a webinar. So you are right up there. And obviously people love the content. They love the book. They love the story. So I want to ask you, what really triggered you or inspired you into writing this book?
So first of all, Sally, thanks. Sally mentioned the commercial was a life-changing kind of and super powerful. And, every time I talk about the Dare to Lead Like a Girl, I have people kind of reminiscing, right? And I think as anyone in the audience doing brand building or marketing, I think we have such amazing power to create life-changing experiences. But my own story, so I kind of hinted a little bit to you, but I'll tell you just kind of maybe a little bit of the anecdote. And yes, I do talk about it in TED, and it's funny you mentioned in the almost 200,000 views. When it went on, my coach in TED asked me, okay, what's your target? And I said, 20,000 views. And he's like, no, that's not really a target. What's your stretch target? And I just said, 1 million views. I want to touch 1 million hearts. So that became kind of, okay, so every year we're adding about 100,000. So with your power, if you like what you see, forward the TED talk and maybe we'll touch 1 million hearts. But so for me, I started with the P&G. I mentioned it was the years of flow. Jim was my boss. And I'll tell you a tale of two cities, okay? So the year was 1998. I was in Jim's office because one of my launches hit a wall, okay? The product was stuck in customs or something like that. And I'm sitting in his office and I'm getting so angry and frustrated. And you can see when I even think about it, I just tear up. That's who I am, right? And I'm sitting in his office and I tear up and I'm like, oh my God, this is the general manager, my manager's manager. And I'm frantically trying to regain my composure. And Jim gives me a tissue box. And when I finally regain my composure, look at this. I tear just thinking about it. He looks me dead in the eye and he said something I'll for always remember. He said, Dalia, don't you ever be embarrassed for crying in the office again. It's a sign of your passion. And passion, Dalia, is your superpower. Wow, right? I can tell you, I was so empowered. And then he added, and if you ever work for someone that doesn't appreciate that, walk away. They don't deserve you, right? And luckily for me, in the 17 years in P&G, I had many managers like Jim that believed in me, sometimes more than I believed myself. And I was able to bring my purpose to work every day with this campaign, with other things that I did. I was just, yeah, passion is your superpower. A lot of comments, wow. 17 years later, okay, I left P&G. It was kind of a family decision. We moved with P&G from Geneva to Moscow and then to Singapore. And after 5 years in Singapore, they needed me back in Geneva. My husband opened a high tech. I said, I want to put my money where my mouth is. We always said we're equal. We kind of take care of each other's career. I decided to leave P&G. We left as friends. And I took a role as CMO for another amazing company. I don't mention the name, but a Fortune 500 company. I love the company. I love the CEO. I love the CMO. I love the vision. They brought me in really to turn around the company to become more consumer centric. I had 100 employees all across Asia. It looked like the dream job, right? 1 month into the role, I got a new boss, which was the local CEO for Asia. And, I can tell you, it took me a week to realize that him and I were like fire and water. Okay. So I'm the fire, all about passion and energy and positivity and people. And he's all about numbers and scorecard and ROI. It was so extreme. We used to joke that the culture was ROI or you die, right? I still remember in one of my first meetings, he said to me, Dalia, I'm not going to tell you what you're good at. For me, it's a total waste of time. I'm only going to focus on what you need to fix. Okay, he was a Six Sigma black belt, and that was his approach to everything, including people. And then he kind of added, oh, and there's no art in marketing, it's only science. You just didn't get it yet, right? So anyone in marketing, it was like a dagger to the heart. But anyway, the story goes that, that day I was summoned into his office and he started giving me feedback. Now, in P&G, we used to call it tough love. Jim was a master of tough love, right? So it's feedback that is direct. There's no sugarcoating. It's honest. It's impactful, but it's delivered from a position of care. And I can tell you that day there was no love. It was just really tough, denigrating, humiliating, belittling, and I'm holding it in. So now I'm a C-suite, right? A CMO. I was the only woman on his team, and I'm holding it in. And then he starts berating my team. And that's where I became so angry and frustrated because I knew how hard they worked, right? And that's when I like a lioness, I was so angry. I was ready to burst. And when I'm frustrated, I tear up. It's almost like he was waiting for it. And he smiled and he gave me a box of tissues. And I can tell you, for a moment, I had that warm, fuzzy feeling. Remember in my first boss, Jim. But then for a moment, I kind of lifted my eyes and I noticed something almost weird about his smile, almost evil, as he turned around the tissue box. And Sharad, I can tell you, I couldn't believe my eyes. On the other side of that tissue box was a handmade sticker he prepared in advance, which read Dalia's tissue box. Now, I don't see the people on the call, but every time I give the talk, everyone goes, right? And that was exactly my reaction. I was like, yeah, Annalise, oh my, exactly. I was like, are you kidding me? This is an HR assault, right? That's when he became all serious and he kind of sat down and said, oh, Dalia, stop being so emotional. It's just boy banter. I know you have a sense of humor. Now, the funny thing, I can tell you, people ask me until today, kind of, why did you stay? Because I stayed there for 3 years because I kept on saying, I'm not going to quit. I was a competitive gymnast, a platoon commander. I don't quit. It's not in my DNA, right? And I kept on thinking I can change him. And I very quickly realized you can't change someone that doesn't want to change. And, kind of first year was all about kind of giving feedback and trying to change. And that didn't work. Second year, it was a little bit about flights, avoiding conflict. The end of the year, we delivered a great scorecard, but I felt physically sick. And the beginning of year 3, what happened for me is actually I attended a P&G alumni event. And I can tell you, I remember it until today. I walked into the hall in Cincinnati, and I literally kind of on the stage were all these leaders talking about servant leadership and people first. And I literally planked myself down in the seat and I said, oh my God, I've been a frog in boiling water. I've become so numb to this bullying, right? That I came back and I remember I sat down and I wrote everything that happened. And I sent it to 2 people, to my husband and Jim. And Jim called me like a minute later. He's like, Dalia, this is bullying. This is a toxic environment. You need to get out of there. You can't change a toxic environment. And I remember saying, I am going to leave, but not before I deliver everything I committed to the CEO I'm going to deliver, because I always deliver my results. And I was, he wanted science, and I was committed to bring back my heart and my art to the workplace. And together with my team, we created a campaign that was very science driven, but also very creative. And when that won an Effie, I said, okay, I got my mojo back. But, I can tell you, and it was time to move on. But the learnings from those 3 years were immense. It's almost like I got a mirror. So in P&G, I learned how to lead. And in those 3 years, I got the mirror, the shadow of what not to do, that made it so clear for me. On myself, I would say here, same person delivered 200%, right? Was 1 rated all my career. Here, right? The company didn't get from me more than 10% of my ability, right? What a waste in human potential, as I mentioned. And that kind of triggered me. And I decided research is me search, right? I wanted to answer the question, can you coach yourself out of a toxic environment? That was my thesis in INSEAD. And, that led me to start studying positive psychology, as I mentioned, and kind of led me on to my new career and my passion. But I guess, I always say we all have pain, and I never wish this pain on anyone. But the real kind of challenge, and something that I write about in the book, is the notion of post-traumatic growth, right? We all know about post-traumatic stress disorder. And I can tell you, when I left, I had post-traumatic stress disorder. I interviewed for companies. Every time I smelled politics, my fingers tingled. And it took me a good 2 years to get it out of my system and learn on myself what it means, post-traumatic growth, and how can we turn our pain into our purpose. And that's kind of basically what I did. I'm now in the asshole eradication business. And I laugh about it, but I can tell you, when the TED came out, I got, thousands of calls. I got calls from women determined to do something, to step up, to take action. I got even more calls from men, that women cried in the office and suddenly they had a textbook. They were always embarrassed. And it's just kind of, this is life. Some, men react with anger and slam the door. Women cry. That's how it goes. I'm not embarrassed by it. You shouldn't. But the most craziest call I got from a guy in Australia. And he said to me, Dalia, I saw your TED talk and I realized that I'm an asshole. What can I do? So that's kind of my, in my book, on my first page, I say, if you know a boss that's kind of should read the book, send me a note. I'll send the book for free. I'm sending 100 books a year. But yeah, post-traumatic growth is not about resilience. Resilience is kind of bouncing back. Post-traumatic growth is when you actually grow from your pain. So that's kind of what I've worked with people.
That's a very moving story, Dalia. I'm touched by it, certainly, and I'm sure many in our audience feel the same way. In fact, Annalisa is asking you a question. Did you get any feedback on the TED Talk from your ex-colleagues?
Yes, I'm trying not to say too much, but I actually went and interviewed my ex-colleagues for my thesis. I went straight into the lion's den, right? And that was a very kind of earth shaking in a way, because they're all decent people. And I think what I learned is a toxic environment, a toxic boss, people mirror a boss. On the positive, they mirror a good leader, okay? But they also very quickly mirror a negative leader. And the impact of that stays even when that boss leaves. The language and how you treat each other and what is acceptable in the corporate world stays. I mean, it's called the phantom toxic boss, right? And so it was fascinating. Most of them saw, most of them were bullied bullied in some way, not to my level, because I guess, I'm a feisty little one, so I probably answered back more than, others. I'll tell you one thing that happened 6 months into the role is a person that placed me in the role and told me how's it's going. And I was very loyal as well, right? So I said, it's okay, it's a little bit challenging. And she said, he's an asshole. You're the only one who can coach him. And her intentions were good, right? But I had this cape over my shoulder. And, I think, yes, I did it. I did chats. Everyone suffered to some extent, but we very quickly learned all together that, my question was, can you coach yourself out of a toxic environment, right? And my answer is yes and no. Okay, so yes, you can build resilience. And I share in the book what helped me build resilience and survive, and to some extent thrive even in that situation. But my big picture is no, you cannot coach yourself out of a toxic environment. There really is only one strategy that works, and that is zero tolerance.
Absolutely. I second that. And fortunately, in my career, I've had some amazing bosses. Fortunately, never been in a toxic environment. And now when I'm the owner and entrepreneur, I'm very conscious of the fact that, I lead my team with example. I never ask them to do something that I'm not willing to do myself. Yeah. I love to give them the freedom to operate. So I'm not a helicopter kind of a boss. I just have 1 5-minute meeting in the morning, and all day the team is on their own. As long as they deliver, those are my KPIs. So I think, especially, post-COVID, when remote working is commonplace, we need to build trust in our teams and give them the freedom to operate, especially after the Great Resignation. I think, working from home is almost a way of life. And a lot of leaders got to rethink and re-engineer their business model to accommodate employees' wishes and requirements. So days are gone when bosses could dictate the terms. And I think Great Resignation has taught us that employees now hold the key and they will decide who they will work for. So if I'm interviewing tomorrow for a job, I hope I'm not, but if I am, I'd like to check out the boss and, figure out if that's where I want to be in terms of spending, my 8 hours a day.
I can tell you, it's right. And if this book was, the TED Talk went out before COVID in 2019, and it was still important then, as I mentioned, only 85% engagement. 1 in 4 employees experience acute work-related anxiety. 1 in 4, that's crazy, right? Yeah, that was before COVID. Now bring COVID, work from home, remote teams, the balancing kind of, if you're not leading from your heart these days, okay, you have no place in the future of work. And, there's research that just came out by the Saul Father and Son for Sloan Management Review. And basically they researched what is the driver of the Great Resignation. They thought, is it burnout? Is it pay? They found that the #1 driver was toxic environments.
Right.
So if it was critical before, now it's imminent. It's imminent that, and the good news for all leaders, like the guy that called me from Australia, is that all these soft skills, first of all, they are the power skills of the 21st century, right, of the future work. And 2, they can be taught. You can teach yourself to have emotional intelligence. You can teach yourself to have more empathy, right? And, it never, leading like a girl never means forgetting about KPIs and performance. I always deliver my numbers, always, okay? my standards are super high for my people, right? But it's kind of, people rise to your highest expectations or sink to your lowest. And it's about how do you, give high expectations, but also give the tools, the empowerment, the autonomy to reach those heights. So that's kind of what the principles are.
Yeah, while I was reading the excerpts of your book, I stumbled across the 5 Ps, the 5 pillars that you talk about leadership. Can you just explain to our audience what those 5 Ps are and what they mean?
Sure. So I decided to kind of create a framework for the book. And I don't like to say I invented it, because philosophers, psychologists all agree that the only definition for happiness is wholeness, that Helen Keller said, okay? And that you need a combination, okay? You need to be growing in each one of them. So, when I do my leadership development workshops in companies, I do a leadership assessment based on the 5 Ps. And I tell them it's not that you need to be 10 in each one of the sections, but you need to be growing in each one of the sections and aware of the areas where you're weaker. So I called it the 5P, coming from marketing. It's easy to remember. So the first one is all around purpose. And purpose is really your core. And that stands at the beginning of everything. That's where everything starts. Purpose is around, understanding what you're strong at, what you're passionate about, and how can you bring it into kind of the workplace. And I can tell you, the reason I thrived in P&G was I was free to live my purpose every single day. I was passionate about people and people empowerment. So I became a training junkie. I spent 50% of my time training my team and others. I was able to, create campaigns that change lives. So this is, about working with your team and understanding your strengths. Whereas in the latter company, my strengths not only weren't appreciated, but they were diminished, right? I was told I was too good with my people. I was even told I was too positive, right? So purpose is the first one, okay? Understanding your strengths. If you operate from strengths, you have 2 times likelihood to succeed. Our strengths strengthen us, our weaknesses kind of weaken us. It's not about ignoring your weaknesses, but it's about neutralizing. And I have a whole methodology that I do on finding your purpose that I share some of it in the book. So that's the first one. And it is the first one for a reason, because it's proven that he who has a why can endure anyhow, right? And, when you have a purpose, kind of all the rest follows. So the second one is really the endurance, okay? I call it, perspective, or the mental strengths. And this is all around, being able to step back. And I sometimes say, step back from the movie, from the drama, sorry, so you can enjoy the movie. Sometimes we're so in the drama, and, it's sometimes called the 3E theory. There's an event and there's an emotion. And we think we're reacting emotionally to the event, but we actually are reacting to the evaluation of that event. So the perspective is around stepping back so you can understand, how many times it happened to you that someone got really angry at you and you kind of the whole day was like, oh, what did I do? And it's all about me. And it had nothing to do with you, right? Your evaluation was completely flawed. So that's kind of the element of the, perspective. It's all around, how do we deal with failure, right? Failure is a very big driver. We learn to fail or we fail to learn, right? So how do we kind of grow from our failure? That's the perspective. The third is physical wellness, and it's a big deal today. Everyone knows the science of physical wellness, but we're not as good as applying it. Now, sometimes I come to companies, talking about my program, they ask me and they say, oh, we do happiness and wellness at work. We do yoga once a week. Now, I'm a yoga teacher. Okay, I'm a huge believer in yoga, but it can't be just one element. So when we talk about the physical wellness, it's what are we doing to take care of ourselves? Okay, I call it better me model. It's about breathing, meditation, eating, touch, recovery, which is all around rest and sleep, and movement, right? It's about digital detox. Too many companies, I mean, we're always on, especially with COVID. Boston Group Consultant did research and they forced their employees to take an afternoon a week off, and productivity went up 74%. So it's really about making sure you can't pour from an empty jug. So making sure your jug is always full. So that's your physical wellness. The fourth P is the most important. If you only remember one thing from today, basically Harvard did research to discover what is the secret of happiness. What is the number one driver of happiness? And they did this longitudinal research, 75 years long, 700, they basically checked 750 men, across 75 years. And they found that the number one driver of happiness was relationships, people, okay? The quality of our life is the quality of our relationships. And as a leader, what are you doing to foster those relationships? What are you doing to get to know your people as people, right? And it could be just your 5 minutes in the morning. Hey, how you doing? Okay. And just really listening in, how they're doing today. What's happening? How can I help? What's going on in your life, right? And then here is kind of the thoughts and go and deliver. I don't care if you deliver from the moon. I talked about it a little bit in Jim's time. We used to go rollerblading, in the parking lots on the lunch breaks. We used to go water skiing on a Friday. We kind of spent time getting to know our peers, even though we were competitors. Theoretically, we had different brands we were responsible for. We were there for each other. And same, is proven for work. So Gallup did research, the number one driver for happiness at work. And the first thing was, do you have a best friend at work? And all the CEOs were, what is this stupid question, right? And they kept on trying to kind of reread the data, but that's what it was. It was, do you have a best friend at work? And number two was, do you have friends at work? So
Right.
people is really important. And then the fifth P is all around positivity. And that's kind of, I remember when I met Tal Ben-Shahar, who's kind of a Harvard's guru. He hates when I call him guru, but he created the most popular course in Harvard for positive psychology. And I started studying with him. And I suddenly realized that everything intuitively that I felt about leadership was grounded in research. So he gave me, and then I started teaching in the university. I'm an adjunct professor for positive psychology in Singapore Management University. Positivity is a really important concept in the workplace. And I remember, I'll tell you just a little anecdote. When we got feedback as a leadership team that we were too negative, surprise, surprise, right? In that second company, I raised my hand and I said, hey, I'm studying positive psychology. I'd love to do some workshops for us. And kind of my boss said, oh, that won't be needed. Thank you, Miss Kumbaya. And that became my nickname. I was too positive. I was Miss Kumbaya, right? I'm wearing yellow today. So, and then I learned that positivity is good for business. Our brain is 30% more productive when we are in positive state. Every job in the world is better performed when you're in a positive state, except if you're a lawyer. Okay, so if you're a lawyer listening in, that's the only job that you need to be kind of a little bit kind of pessimistic. But all the rest, positivity is important. And positivity is not about being happy all the time, but it's really giving ourselves the permission to be human. So those are the
Amazing.
five.
I put all those 5 P's in the chat. I put also a link to where people can grab your book. And now I need some advice from you, Dalia, now that I have you on my show. So as you know, I'm in the digital space and I'll share my typical day with you. I have an average of 5 Zoom meetings. I do 1 webinar almost every week. I'm very active on LinkedIn. I create 7-8 posts a day. I share, I tweet. I'm on Discord. I'm on Telegram. I'm on Botem. I'm on WhatsApp. How the hell can I have a work-life balance?
Oh my God.
What is digital detox? Is that a myth or is that for real? So let's talk about work-life balance. I explained to you my typical day, and I'm telling you, a lot of people in the audience are working 12 to 14 hours a day, just like me. So where does work-life balance come in and how do we achieve nirvana?
Wow. So, I always say you want to have work-life balance, have kids because it gives you perspective, right? It gives you perspective. It forces you. And I remember when I was a young mom, I was like, how am I going to do that? But you come home and they're jumping at you with all their stories. And I just learned that I had to put my phone back in my bag. Okay. And I went back to it. 8:30, they were asleep and I went back and I often worked until 11. Some days I was in date night out with my husband. But Franklin Covey Yeah, Franklin Covey. Stephen Covey, sorry.
Stephen Covey.
Sorry, I mixed it
Yeah.
up. So Stephen Covey talks about, the 7 habits of highly effective people, and he tells the story of sharpening your sword. And many people know the phrase, but don't really know the story behind it. So do you know where it comes from? I'll share with the audience because I think it's such a simple concept. So there were two woodcutters, okay, and the task was to cut as much wood as possible. And this one guy was like you, 14 hours a day at it nonstop, okay, blowing, cutting the trees, from morning to night. And the other dude kept resting every 2 hours. And they were like, what lazy dude is that, right? And then at the end of the day, to everyone's amazement, that guy that kept resting cuts significantly more trees than the other guy. And they said, how did you do it? And basically what they learned that every time he took a rest, he wasn't, he was eating and nourishing himself, but he was also sharpening his saw. So every blow, he could give less blows and they were all stronger. So, and that concept, I remember learning it kind of early on in my career. And I just kind of became a master of energy, of my own energy, feeling when you need a rest. I do a lot of walk-in meetings. I don't know if but that's when I do my training program, when I do the physical module, I get people with earphones and we do it while walking, and they need to take a picture of where they were walking to see that it's possible. So a meeting that doesn't need an Excel sheet, okay, if you're onboarding a new person, or in general, we also need these just talking, okay, with our peers. So I do them while walking. That's kind of been one strategy for me. The work from home is something that everyone's talking about. I've been doing it ever since my daughter, who's 20, was born. P&G, basically, I had a boss who told me, I don't care if you work from the moon, as long as the work is delivered. And that became my focus day. So I'm a little bit ADHD, I'm hyperactive, in case you didn't notice. So I have one day, which is my focus day, and it's really hard for me to get started. And once I get started, I hate when I'm disturbed. So I literally lock myself that one day at work, at home, is my focus day for my reading, my writing, everything that requires kind of focus. And I put my phone aside and I focus. So there's different strategies, but I think, work-life balance, get as much help as you can. I mean, for anyone who's a young parent, I mean, you're past that stage. I'm past that stage at this stage, but I remember as a young mom, one of my first leaders, Deb and Retta, she said, think about help as an investment, not a cost. And believe me, in Geneva, my helper was making as much as I was making as a young associate brand manager. And so it was a big investment, but it allowed me to focus. If I only had 3 hours, when I came back from work until my kids were asleep, I made sure that those 3 hours I was present, right? And we ended up doing a commercial about that in Vietnam, because you go in Asia and you see everyone sitting in a restaurant and everyone's behind their phone, right? And I see it here. Moms do everything they can to leave at 4 o'clock from work and go to the park, but they're in the park with their phone. And there's nothing kids hate more. Better pick them up at 6. They have no notion of time, but when you're there, be there. And I always say, be there for the moments that count, meaning I even used to kid my kids, the birthdays always fell on a Saturday. But I try to be there for those important moments, those plays, those birthdays, the key elements. So be there for the moments that count and make the moments that you're there count. So
amazing advice. I've been taking notes, and I'm going to really try hard to implement what you said.
No, I'm working with a tech company to shut down the systems at 6 p.m. And you can write emails, but they will not get sent until 9 a.m. the next day.
That is amazing. Yeah.
People apply in different ways.
That is a practical advice, and I hope more companies try that out, because you have to experiment, right? Not everything will work for all organizations based on their culture, but leaders need to try out what works for their environment and what works for their teams. Okay, now before we close, I have 2 more things to talk to you about, Dalia. In your book, you talk about emotional bravery, and that kind of stuck to me. Can you explain what that means and how can one get there?
So, hey, Andrea, I'm just seeing a friend of mine. Yeah, so emotional, I mean, there's a lot of work in the field of emotional intelligence. Okay, there's the 4 elements: getting to know yourself, right? You know, emotional awareness, emotional management, awareness of others' emotions, and management of that. All of that is great. But I think one kind of thing that was missing for me is when we say manage our emotions, it sounds as if our emotions are bad. And all the research in the world shows that, you know, suppressing emotions leads to disease. And I worked in Asia for 10 years. There's no region that suppress. We're kind of bred that, you know, you need to hold in your emotions. But what happens is all this passive aggressive, you know, it blows up either in passive aggressive or in disease. And there's enough research. There's a great book by John Sarno around backache. Why? Because, you know, that's the weakest link for many men. Why? He basically was researching and he found that men experience backache during their wife's pregnancy. And he was like, what is that all about? And he researched into it and he said this suppressed emotion of jealousy. They're jealous of their baby, but they're not willing to admit it, right? So they're suppressing that emotion and then it comes out in their weakest link. And, you know, people said, what's this woohoo research? But look into it. I mean, he's a very respectable physician. So it's the whole idea of don't, you know, suppress, express. But when you express, there's a way, right? Because if you blow up, okay, so I'm saying it's not about not crying. It's about saying, hey, sorry, you triggered me. I'm taking a moment, you know, come back in a few minutes and then talk emotions unemotionally. Listen, you triggered me. This is important to me. I found that insulting. And why? Because we know the data. We know that only 7% of your message is the content. 93% is the nonverbal. So when you're blowing up emotionally, the other person doesn't perceive what you say. So emotional bravery is giving ourselves the permission to be human. Okay, it's not, you know, it's okay not to be okay. And I like Tal Ben Shachar says only 2 people don't have negative emotions: psychopaths or dead people. So if you're sad, it's great news, right? You're not a psychopath and not dead.
I'm
So,
going to remember that one. Yeah.
right? So first of all, embrace it. Okay. I always say, you know, center and then act on emotion. And center again is an acronym. So first it's contain, claim and contain. Hey, I have this emotion. Okay, recognizing I'm angry, etc. The N stands for name it. Why? It's a nice kind of our emotions are stored in the amygdala. Okay, our rationale is stored in the frontal cortex. The two operate as a seesaw. When one is aroused, the other one is depressed. And naming it using language, okay, forces the frontal cortex to operate. And by default, it calms down emotions. Like you say to a child, I realize you're frustrated. So name the emotion. Is it frustration? Is it anger? Is it depression? Is it whatever it is? So that's the N, center. The T is tame. So contain, name, tame. What is tame? Tame is around what I said earlier, you know, stepping back. Okay, stepping back from the drama so you can understand, taking the poison out of it. You know, that can allow you to explain, okay, and try to understand with empathy what's going on. You know, is it me? Is it them? What's going on here? And then the last one is refrain. Okay, so what is another way to look at it? And then you act. You don't react on emotions, but you act on them. You never bury them. You know, there was I think it was Henry Ford who had a system where he used to write an anger letter. So he would write everything out and then he would put it in his drawer and he would read it in the next day. And if the emotions were still raw, he would leave it in the, and only when his emotions were calmed down, but he was still angry, then he acted on it. So, so that's kind of the idea of being emotionally, you know, brave is recognizing all range of emotions, okay, and as a leader, making space for them, okay, because different people react. Some, as I mentioned, you know, and it's scientifically proven that men react to frustration with anger and walk out and slam the door, and women maybe will tend to be sad. And why is one reaction better than the other in the workplace? They both say you're triggered. If an emotion is really high, it's usually connected with fear. So there's something that triggered you. Let's understand what it is. How can I help? That's the only reaction to it.
Amazing. That's a masterclass on leadership right there. Thank you, Dalia. And the very last thing before I let you go, I want to give a shout out actually to Dr. Annalisa Boyson, who's very active on the chat. She's an impact entrepreneur, and I'm part of her global village. So she's got global entrepreneurs and trying to create a great impact through the village, which in time is going to be in the metaverse, etc. So big shout out to Dr. Annalisa for the good work that she's doing. Yeah.
I was excited
And
to know she wrote. I didn't know the original of the saying. The origin of the
Right.
saying. Many don't. The sharpen the sword. That's
Yes.
what I get it. Thank
yeah.
you.
Part of being an impact entrepreneur is about giving back. And I was earlier, Dalia, on your website, and I saw a tab which said giving back. Tell us more about that.
So first of all, the book, all profit from the books, year one goes towards Lead Like a Girl programs for underprivileged girls. And this is a nice story. I always planned to do that when the book came out. And 6 months before the book came out, I got a call from a lady in India, and she said, hey, I saw your TED Talk. I wonder if you would come speak for us. I have this non-for-profit, we take women that are just starting their career, and there's a scholarship program. And I said, yeah, I'm in. And then she told me, and there's girls from Africa as well. And then she said, and guess what we call the program? The program is called Lead Like a Girl, based on the commercial, right?
Right.
So here I am. So now I'm on the board of that. And we have another program in India, and we're looking to expand to the UK and the US. But, kindness is contagious. And the one kind of thoughts, that I want to leave you with is, I come originally from Israel. And in Israel, the root of the word to give is Natan, Natan. I don't know if you noticed, but it's a palindrome. It can be read the same from left and from right. And because that's the meaning of giving. When you give, you get. And, I just love seeing the ripples of kindness. And I did a little campaign with kind of buy a book for a friend and see what happens with it. So I invite you all, if this touched you, and you want to bring more purpose, joy, and kindness back into the workplace, we know scientifically that it helps productivity. So anyone's thinking about ROI, there's no ROI without people. I now call it return on interaction. Okay, so how can we get higher return of interaction through the 5 Ps, through giving back, through kind of whatever you're doing? And, everyone can give something if it's only their smile, right? Or their kindness. So that's kind of what I try to do with the book and with others. And, I think the biggest thing is lift others as you rise.
Thank you, Dalia. Can you be my best friend?
Yes, I am. I'm coming to see you in Dubai.
So yes, I'm looking forward to seeing you in real life early September. Please give me prime time. I want to spend 1 hour with you and, do a deep dive on leadership. And this has been an amazing session. I'm sure I echo, the words of the audience here. And on a housekeeping note, there's going to be a recording of this available along with the podcast tomorrow, same time on onlywebinars.com. Do share this conversation with your family, with your friends, with your community. Let's try and touch as many hearts as we can and change as many people as we can. Dalia, it's been an honor. It's been a pleasure. And now that you've agreed to be my best friend, you've made my day. And I look forward to seeing you on the other side. So all the best. Take care. Be good.
Thank you, everyone.
And see you soon. Bye-bye. Thank you, audience. See you.
LinkedIn and anything would be great to be in touch. Thank you.
Absolutely. Bye-bye.
Bye.